Okay, example 2 is a little more difficult because of this negative 2x squared situation. Plus these numbers are bigger. You're probably going to need a calculator for this one. Okay. I'm trying to find out what would this graph look like. Now I will tell you, in my particular problems, the numbers you want to pick for x are typically kind of a hint given here. Obviously, they don't have anything in the negative x value over here, so we are going to plug in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that, and so on. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about that section right there. That's the biggest issue. Okay. Here's my t-chart. I'm going to pick x, find y. Here's the work. Calculator is going to be needed. We need to remind ourselves of elementary order of operations. That negative 2x squared, that means negative 2 times x squared. We got to remember, some people call it PEMDAS, some people call it, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, but you do parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division, adding and subtracting. So we need to do the exponent first. When we have a negative 2 times x squared, you need to square the x first, get that answer, and then multiply by negative 2. Okay, so I'm going to plug in 0 for x. That's going to give me negative 2 times 0 squared. I square the 0 and get 0 times negative 2 is 0. I'm going to plug in 0 for that, and I'm going to get plus 0. And then I have a minus 28. Okay, so when I put a 0 in for x, square it, 0, times that is 0. Put a 0 there, get 0, minus 28. All that adds up to negative 28. In the concept of battleship, when I plug in a 0, I get negative 28, which is a massive miss. Okay? I want to plug in a 1. Okay? I take 1 and I square it. Okay? Let me do the next section of work. 1 squared. I square first and get 1. Then I multiply by negative 2. That is where the mistake's going to be made. Make sure you square the 1 first. Don't multiply first. Square first, then multiply. Now I'm going to take 16 times 1, which is 16, minus 28. So that gives me a term of negative 2. It gives me a term of positive 16. And then I've got my constant of negative 28. I'm going to add these two together and get 14 minus 28 is negative 12. When x is 1, y is negative 12 is still a miss. Okay? Plug in 2. Put a 2 in for x. That's going to be negative 2 times 2 squared. Square first and get 4, then multiply and get negative 8. So the negative 2x squared term is negative 8. Now I'm plugging in a 2 right there. That's going to give me 16 times 2, or 32. And then don't forget your constant of negative 28. Add all those together. And a negative 8 and a negative 28 is a negative 36. And a positive 32 is negative 4. When I plug in a 2, all that comes out to negative 4. And we're on the board right there. Okay. So what we have is the graph is coming up like this. And we got to keep plugging in until it changes directions. Let's plug in a 3 and see what happens. I'm going to put a 3 in for x. That's negative 2 times 3 squared. I'm going to put a 3 in for x and get 16 times 3 minus 28. Square first and get 9 times negative 2 is negative 18 for that term. 46 times 3, or 16 times 3 is 48 minus 28. Combine those and that's your y answer. Negative 18 and negative 28, that's negative 46. Plus 48 is positive 2. When x is 3, y is positive 2. Okay, so it's still coming up pretty steep, but it has not changed directions yet. I'm going to plug in a 4 and see what happens. Put a 4 in for x. That gives me negative 2 times 4 squared. Put a 4 in for x. That's 16 times 4. And then don't forget my minus 28. Square first and get 16. Times negative 2 is negative 32 for that term. 16 times 4 is positive 64. And don't forget your negative 28. I'm going to combine the two negatives together. That gives me negative 60. And a positive 64 is a positive 4. So when x is 4, y is 4. So it still hasn't changed directions yet, but it's starting to curve more. I have a feeling 5 is going to give us some information we want to know here. Plug a 5 in. Negative 2. Sorry, my paper is going to start moving on me one-handed. Plug in a 5. 16 times 5. 16 times 5 minus 28. Square first and get 25 times negative 2 is negative 50. 16 times 5 is 80. Let me verify that. 16 times 5 is 80. Minus 28. When I add the two negatives together, that's negative 78. And positive 80 is positive 2. When I plug in a 5, all that equals 2. So I do a 5, 2. And we have all the information we need now. The graph is changing directions right there, and it's coming back down. Right there's my vertex. The line of symmetry would be right there. That's where the graph would fold over. This point matches with this point. This point would match up with this point. And continue on forever downward. Okay? So again, you just pick x, find y, pick x, find y. Obviously the math is much more difficult in this problem. Make sure that you handle the x squared situation correctly. You square first, then multiply, because order of operations says you do exponents, so I square first, then I multiply by the coefficient, in this case negative 2. Just a little additional information. This is a number just like slope, sort of. This number is the one that's controlling which way the graph opens. This one is opening downward because it's a negative coefficient on the x squared. Our other one was a positive. Since that was a positive 1, it opened upward. Later in the week, we'll talk about how to graph these instead of using pick x, find y. But right now, I just want to make sure you understand the concept of pick x, find y. And just be careful doing the work. I would strongly suggest you do this on the side work. Plot these points, and you should see where they start to change directions. Okay? You have 4 examples. 2 of them are pretty quick and easy. 2 of them will take a little bit more time. Bye.